Okay, so today our in-class exercise is going to be working on sardine packaging. Why sardine packaging? Seemingly illustrators love working on sardines because they're really pretty easy to work on, as well as they can be kind of funky and fun. So you see lots of illustrators love to take on old vintage sardine packaging or anchovies, things like that. Now, one of the things that we want to sort of look at today is understanding how simple icons can turn into really simple design systems. So, meaning that what you kind of start with when it comes to shape and line can be carried through to actually create a design system. So we'll be looking at how to draw a sardine, how to create a package based on the elements that I use to draw the sardine. Sort of the idea behind this is that we start to look at not just kind of dry, I've got to get this, not just dry sort of icons, but trying to understand why some icons start to take on, have a lot more character, are a little bit more funky, and how you can sort of create those things. You can sort of see, I don't like that, but that's okay. So why some icons seem to be more funky and some seem to be more dry, and how we go about creating something like that that has some character. And this basically can be used in any type of design system and any type of icon. So I am going to open up Illustrator, and you can sort of see how I go through this. We are going to start in Illustrator. We are going to end up as a final piece is going to be kind of a funky sardine packaging that's finished off in dimensions. Some of the things besides the icon part of it, some of the things that we'll be looking at is using a little bit more expressive topography in packaging, and as well as using some of the elements that we've looked at in our class when it came to style. So using numbers, using some vintage elements combined with sort of modern elements and modern illustration and modern icon design. So those will be some of the things that we're going to carry over. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically gauge what kind of package I'm going to make. And I'm just sort of making this up as I go along, so you'll see that I make lots of mistakes. I think this sardine package is it's not going to be just like one of those metal tins. This is going to be like more of a high-end package, quite long, where the package will slide out of, so more of a box style. So I can change my dimensions as we go, but I'm just starting with relatively a box. So the key with this particular in-class project is that you're going to create your own package, but you're going to use the basic fundamentals that I use in this one. The composition can be completely different, but the way I go about actually designing this should stay relatively the same. So the first thing I'm going to tackle is I'm going to actually do an example of the sardine to begin with, and all that is going to do is sort of set me up for the rest of it. So I'll be able to sort of understand the elements I'm working with, that sort of thing. So the key to any icon is to really keep control of your line work. Keep symmetry in mind. So one of the things that I like to do is sort of somewhat keep things fairly symmetrical. So I'm just going to start with my pen tool. The other thing that's very important with icons is that they need to be less sort of they need to be like, to make them funky, they have to have sort of a point of view, and they have to have some style to them. And often that means that there's a there's a gap between reality and sort of making something that looks interesting and unique. So the closer you try to make an icon actually look like the element it is, typically the more boring it is, and it tends to look like an iStock element. So with this one, I'm going to try and make things that are fairly geometric. So I'm going to start with my pen tool, and I'm going to make this one using a lot of sort of straight lines. I'm going to make it kind of fairly fat. And then I'll show you how I clean this stuff up as we go. So with something like this, I like to have some symmetry. I like to keep things kind of as clean as I can. So I've already made a mistake by sort of arcing that, and so I tend to start over a lot. So we'll just do that again. I'm just going to make this a straight line, and then I'll arc sort of the belly of our fish, and then I'm going to sort of disattach the head, and that really is just to sort of show the gill. And then now this one wants to sort of echo that shape as well. So we know that fish have somewhat of a symmetrical look to them. So however you decide to do the head, I mean, you could do it many different ways. So if I were to take this, I could easily replace that and kind of do more of a straight down sort of a pike look to it, where it kind of looked like angst-ridden. It's an angst-ridden pike. So I would do something more like that. But any way that you do it, you want to make sure that you're not just sort of replicating. So you see, I gave this guy a big kind of an overbite that sort of plays on that the angry sort of pike look. This one has just a slight opening for the mouth, and then so if I just sort of eyeball it, I know that I don't want to make the eyes super realistic, so I'll tend to use oversized one. Once I have one, then I'll go Command C, Command F. That copies and pastes in place, and then I can scale that down in place and really not have to worry that it's shifted on my document at all. So there you see we're starting to get something. I think on the tail I am going to go like purely sort of symmetrical. So if I take the polygon tool and I click on it once and change that to 3, well, all that does is it gives me a perfect triangle, also a tail. So with that I can decide, okay, that's actually not a a bad shape for our tail. Sort of line these things up so you can sort of see what I'm working on here. I'll bring this down in size, scale it down, so you can sort of see what we have here. I'll get rid of the angry pike. Now, it feels like we're a little bit big here, so we're just going to bring this down a little bit, and I'm actually going to just going to flatten it out just a little bit. Still keeps it sort of symmetrical, but I don't want it to be, I don't want the entire illustration to be tail. So one of the reasons I am keeping it as a triangle is I'm going to use that shape to really give my entire sort of give my entire sardine the detail that I want. So if I take this, and I'm just going to delete, I'm going to go in and I'm going to delete the back line so that it becomes that sort of shape, and then I'm going to delete the fill. So if I look at it now, I'll fatten those up a little bit. That is going to become sort of a very important aspect of this illustration. So if I take those lines, and let me just think about what I want to do with this. I could duplicate them. That might not be a bad route to go. I'm going to delete this one so that I have sort of 3 going that way, and then all I'm going to do is going to grab that. I'm going to use my reflect tool. I'm going to go Shift Option and reflect it back the other way so that we know that these lines are relatively symmetrical. Oh, wait a minute. So hang on, let me think about this. Okay, so what I've decided is I'm going to sort of do this overlapping shape. So all I did was create one, and then just went Shift Option, drag one down, and then went Command D to create the other ones. That way I know that they're perfectly symmetrical. Then I flip them, and then all I'm going to do is sort of I've drawn a triangle, and the triangle basically, well, it's based on my very original triangle, which is what these lines were based on. So if I sort of select all of them now and go clipping mask, you can sort of see it's not quite perfect, but it's very close. So what I can do is just pull it back a little bit, and you sort of see that it gives us kind of an interesting overlap. So that's sort of where these ones came from. And then I'm just going to scale it down, squish it a little bit, so that will do it all sort of at once. Then I can decide how big I'm going to make it. I'm not going to really commit to colors just yet. So now one of the things that I'm going to commit to is using these angles for the overall design system. So I tend to do this a lot if, I tend to do this a lot when I'm designing. I'll come up with a sort of an idea, and then I'll reuse those elements. And part of that is, you know, I want to have a consistent design, but I also want to have the ability to, well, not the ability, I actually want to not have to absolutely draw a million different elements to put together a design system. All right, so now you can sort of see I'm sort of using this triangle kind of shape, And now I'm going to use that in a couple. Okay, so all I've done is duplicated the exact same lines that I've used for the tail, right? Reflected them. They are a little bit off, and that's irritating me, so I'm going to fix them. Take those, do that, bring them down. There we go. So now I'll get rid of these. So if I do this, I'm going to use this same pattern on our sardine. Just going to take out the inside ones. And what this starts to do is it starts to have some consistency through our design because you're starting to see some of the same elements reused. As well, I'm not having to sort of do all of these things from scratch. So I'm just sort of going to do that. So now I'm using these sort of the same geometric lines you've seen. We've started with these circles. So when I look at the salmon, or sorry, the sardine, it is pretty, it's not quite there yet. Let's see here. So I'm using okay. So I just redid this a little bit. I am still using relatively the same pattern, so using the same angled geometric lines, which is easy to accomplish because it doesn't take a lot of using the pen tool, and so that makes it fairly easy. And then I'm also going to use the same dots that I sort of used up at the front for the eyeball, just to give it a little bit more pattern. That's all that I'm really after here, is giving it a bit more pattern. Let's see here. So I'm just going to give it, add a bit of stroke to it, just to add a few details here and there. So do that. So I'm just going to make sure that I sort of use that. I've introduced a stroke just to give us a little bit of detail up front, and then all I'm doing is using that detail a little bit, a little bit through the body, just to give it a bit more detail. Then I can adjust where my dots are, try and have them sort of free and clear of any element. So I'm going to scale this down, and then I'm going to try basically place it at the same place. And the only reason I'm doing this is because we know fish have scales. A lot of fish have patterns on them. So all I'm doing is sort of just playing that up a little bit. Really play up on that pattern aspect of of a fish. So I'm just going to adjust where those fall. So now you can see, so after a really long time of figuring this stupid thing out, is I have some geometric lines that relatively have the same kind of look and feel to them, and I'm going to stick with that. So if I do things like I want a couple lines up here, I'm just going to go and pull that off of there and repeat it. And if I need to have sort of a secondary bit of line work in here, I might do something like that, or not. So let's just say that's good for our fish right now. Next thing I'm going to do is try and figure out the actual how to bring the same aspects of the fish into the packaging. So all we really have right now is one fish, and the fish is being made up of the same angled lines, and it's being made up of circles. It has basic color to it. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to use the exact same patterning to create my packaging. So what I want to do with this packaging is when I have my fish sort of set up, and then I want to step and repeat it as we go. So I'm going to make, well, we can scale that up a little bit. Now, I'm just going to step and repeat it, so Command D, all the way down. And I'm just going to play around with the idea of having the label sort of go down the middle. So something like that. Maybe I extend it, or maybe I slightly shift it over so it's not perfectly symmetrical. So all I'm trying to do is sort of show a little bit of the fish underneath it, and then at the same time pick up on some of the elements on the packaging itself. So I'm just checking to see if it would be better to do something like that. We'll leave it like that for now. It may change. It's one of the great things about sort of doing this on the fly. So now if I go in and if I sort of understand that I'm using this pattern and I've been using it quite a bit, I'm going to continue to use that, and really that becomes a design system. So if I'm going to use this as a decorative element, I'm just going to bleed it off there. I'm going to go Command C, Command F. I'm going to pull that to the front. I'm going to, oops, I'm not going to rotate it. I'm going to click on this underneath, and I'm going to make a clipping mask. What that does is just make sure that our lines are absolutely symmetrical and are being cut off at the right point. So maybe I'll do 3 of those. Maybe they're too big, so I'm going to grab them all. Just pull them back a little bit like that. So really what I'm doing now is I want to have a sort of a decorative area of an overlay. So we've sort of looked at design that uses pattern, and that's really sort of what I'm doing here. Is I really am just trying to create patterns with this. So I'm just going to pull this back even a bit further. So we start seeing a little bit of pattern of the fish. So as I look at it, I'm sort of just going to set up a bit of a alternating color pattern. So I'm just going to use some of the color that we see down below, and maybe I slightly shift it so it doesn't look like it just disappears. There we go. So I'm trying to stay within a fairly tight color palette. So what I'm going to do, let's see here. I'm going to get rid of this one, and then I'm going to use an area where we're going to knock out, I'm basically going to knock out our type here. So I'm going to do an area like that, and we're going to pretend like our package, we're doing basically the top of it. I'm not doing the side of it right now. So if I do that, then maybe I bring up another sort of triangle up here, and then I'm going to flip that across. So you can sort of see I am using relatively all the same elements, and I can mix them up here a little bit. So if I do this, and then I should measure these off, but I'm on a roll now, so no luck. What I'm going to do is sort of introduce, because we're putting type on this, there's no way that I'm going to just stick with these colors for type. So I'm introducing a white, then it's not going to be so shocking when I introduce the type. So I'm going to set up number of sardines in here. So I'm starting to think about what I'm actually going to have on this package. So I've sort of set up those triangles to sort of point at the circle, and I'm going to put a circle in there. So now I'm just, right now what I'm doing is just filling in information, right? And so it'd be no different than if I kind of did this as a thumbnail, but because this is a live presentation, I'm not going to do that. So I'm just adding a little bit of purple to these guys. And you're probably asking me, okay, what's that about? Well, part of this is I'm going to add a skeleton aspect to it. So let's see. So if I'm going to add a skeleton aspect, I'm just going to make, I want it to be super graphic. So this is the thing about icons, is that the more sort of basic and sometimes geometric you can make them, the better. So I'm going to do that. Continue that on, and I could do this mathematically, but again I'm just trying to get through this so that I don't spend over an hour sort of showing you how to do this, so you can do your own. So we'll do that. Maybe we'll do one more. So once we have that, sometimes what I'll do too, if I'm working in Illustrator, I'll go up under Smart Guides and click on that, because then when I click on this, I know that I can shift it, and if you see when I hit the edge of it, it'll go intersect and I can stop. Right, so a lot of the times I'm working Smart Guides, And so once I have one, it's great. I'm just gonna grab those. I'm gonna group that. I could make these white so that they're more like a skeleton. That would be too expected. And I don't think I want to have this one. There we go. Kind of think you kind of see it's a skeleton, but not really. Somewhat. I don't know. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to slightly. I'm just going to select the bottom of this eye and go Command C, Command V. So you can do that. I'm actually going to give it like kind of an old vintage. It's kind of a vintage. It's a little bit of a really friendly. It'll be a really friendly kind of break into the border here. So I just want to make sure that that goes like that, and then all I'm doing is going Command D, and I can check to see how close we are to the ends. You can sort of see. I can adjust that mathematically, but again, I'm doing this sort of on the fly. So I'm going to grab that. You see when I pull this back, and just because I'm slightly extending it, it's actually okay, because you're not going to really notice that those are distorted, because I've distorted all of them at the same time. So I'm going to Shift Option, flip them to the other end. All this is just to give us kind of a bit of a fun kind of border feel to it. Then I'm going to take this. I'm going to bring this right down in size. So this is going to be part of our. Now we're starting to move in on the type. So what I'm going to do is have a little bit of fun. I want it to be kind of a little bit. It's going to be modern and vintage, I hope, when I'm done. So what I want to do is set up a couple little icons in here. So I'm going to reduce all of this down a bit. So if I want these things to intersect, I can actually select all of them like that. And if I go up, so yeah, well, we're off to an okay start. So what I want to do next is basically I'm going to name my sardines, so give it a title, and I basically want to set it up to have a couple levels of titles, so I can use a couple different typefaces to get this across. It's not going to be purely vintage. I want it to be vintage with a little bit of modern twist to it. So I'm going to call it Slimy and Smelly Sardines. And then my second type, make that uppercase. My uppercase, we'll see. The next thing, I'm just going to type this in. Okay. Pickled North Atlantic left eye socket sardines. Going to give it weight, and then we'll look at those elements. So I'm going to start. I think I'm going to do this as a script. And then I'm relatively going to have these things sort of. So instead of looking at a really old sans or old complete serif. I think what I'm going to do is use kind of a modern slab serif that actually has a bit of a vintage feel. So I'm just going to pop that in there. So this is Archer. It's fairly thin. Has a bit of a vintage feel to it, but it also has some sort of modern elements to it as well. So I want to give myself some room in there. And I can scale all of this stuff up and down as we go. So I'm going to bring this down a little bit. So I want to balance these things up. So one of the things that I may want to do is just bring in a few elements that have a little bit, they're a little bit funky type thing. So we sort of looked at a few packaging examples where I showed you a lot of sort of little elements that tend to give it areas of interest, that type of thing. So that's sort of what I'm doing with the bottom of it. So it really becomes sort of a little bit of playing with type. So just sort of giving these some really kind of small type, where they're made, that type of thing. And kind of the year they were established. Now with this, I can't decide whether I want to use like really vintage. Everything is tracked out, so I need to fix that. I can't decide if I want to give it like completely vintage numbers or just sort of stick with my typeface. I'm going to go with that. Archer does have some sort of interesting numbers, so we'll do that. Now, the key with any of this is to sort of get a nice balance in the type itself. So this is sort of the area that we can see. I'm going to pull this down. Just bring this up a little bit. What I'm trying to do is just create sort of areas of white space. So if we sort of look in here, we get some different chunks of white space that breaks up this information, and it just gives the eye a bit of a break. There's a lot of issues, but that's not bad. I'll just see what happens if I sort of take these elements and tie them into the white sort of skeleton. So that's a little bit better. Okay, so I kind of have the beginning of this packaging, or relatively the top, and pretty much using the same elements through the entire thing. I do not like these things in white. Just they stand out a little bit too much, so I'm just going to pop those back to purple and let the numbers sort of jump out a little bit so you can sort of see what we have. Now, I could bring in some other elements as well. So I'll try it, and I will be very honest if it doesn't work with you. So, I could bring in a little stipple, but I think that's another lesson. But if I do want to sort of roughen it up a little bit, I could bring in a bit of a fun sort of halftone pattern. So if I take that dark color I often sort of keep these, sort of make them and keep them. So I have these sort of bigger to smaller halftone patterns. So if I take those, and I probably don't want them to cover up my actual sardines, but what I could do is I could make them that kind of brighter yellow and see how that works. And I could scale them up a little bit too. I might even have them sort of bleed over into the other side. So I do that sort of thing. You see it gives a bit of a texture. I probably want it to be a little bit more noticeable than that. So no, that's not bad. All we're after sort of is to, introduce a little bit more texture to it. And I absolutely could do that using a stipple effect with brushes, but in this case I'm just going to do this with a series of halftone pattern dots that I've created, and I just want to flip them so that we can have big to small. And these don't have to be perfect at all, so you sort of see it does add sort of a nice element to these. Well, now all I'm doing is just sort of getting things to sort of line up and make it to the edge, and then I'll end up blowing up these a little bit. So I probably want to do, if I'm going to make it this long, and I can change this as we go. Just do one more down here. Well, we'll leave that like that and see how it looks. What I might do is just sort of continue that there. Yeah, I think that's better. I might add something down here. Let's see. So again, I'm just simply adding a little bit of texture, a little bit of a few number elements, that sort of thing. Okay, so let's kind of leave it at that, and then what I'm going to do is bring in some side elements. Okay, so I basically have really simple package. Now all I'm going to do, I put in a couple of sort of faux drop shadows under this top part. You can sort of see there, just using multiply. The last thing I'm going to do is just take some of the exact same elements and literally create some imagery for the sides of the package itself, and then I'm going to bring it into dimensions. So yeah, I'll start importing them. So all I've done is I've taken my sort of main elements from the top and created some secondary elements that I can use for the sides. So then I'll bring those into dimensions. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do is to bring it into dimensions. And when you bring it into dimensions, with this one, I want you to put in a branded background. So that could be elements of your image, it could just be colors from the packaging, or it could be elements of type. But what you want to do is make a connection between your package and the actual background.